Welcome to the Michigan Man Podcast on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V-Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew, for Wolverine fans from coast to coast. Go Blue and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. With us this week to discuss Saturday's Big Ten Championship game, the playoffs, and more is Clayton Sayfie from the Wolverine magazine and the Wolverine ON3. Before that, let's get started with a few of my thoughts. It was a great atmosphere and a lot of fun last Saturday, whether you were at the game or watching on TV. Yes, we would have liked to have seen more fireworks from the offense, but you have to give credit where credit is due. That Iowa defense was very, very good. I think there were a couple of reasons why the offense struggled at times. The main reason was the offensive line was reworked with the loss of Zach Zinter the week before. The fact that all of those guys had playing time this year really doesn't matter. They hadn't played as a starting unit before, and that's really important. Communication was a big factor, especially with pass protection. JJ still didn't look near 100%, and he was indecisive on quite a few pass plays. And we really hadn't seen that much this year. Another factor was the game plan. The week before against Ohio State, we were really creative. Saturday night, it looked like we were running our base offense without many wrinkles. That's okay too. We kept it simple and played to our defensive strength, which is smart football, and that was more than enough. The other big reason I thought we weren't as sharp was because of the Ohio State game just the week before. The amount of focus and emotional investment the guys had in preparing for and then playing that game was draining. So the fact we turned it around in 7 days and played on that big stage was not easy. We did it though. Mission accomplished. 3 Big Ten championships in a row is an achievement no other Michigan team has ever earned. As the game ended and the celebration started, I think it was a big exhale you heard from the fan base, the players, and the coaches. With all of the stuff this team has had hanging over their heads this season, they never flinched, as Jim likes to say, and delivered every week. So, a job well done, guys. Now we heal and in a week start preparing for Alabama. A lot of you might be nervous about that matchup, but Jim and the guys know if you want to be the best, you have to beat the best. It is going to be a beautiful scene in Pasadena on January 1st as we lock horns with Nick Saban and his very talented Crimson Tide team. With me today to discuss that and more is Clayton Sayfie from the Wolverine magazine and the Wolverine ON3. So stay with us. Joining us on our game day segment this week to talk about the Big Ten Championship, the college football playoffs, and more is Clayton Sayfie from the Wolverine magazine and the Wolverine ON3. Great to get you back with us, Clayton.
Great to be here. Exciting times.
It is a very exciting time. As we said, there is so much going on, but let's start right now with some of your thoughts on what happened last weekend, the Big Ten Championship game. It sure wasn't pretty, maybe not as pretty as we would have liked it to have been. That was a tough physical game, wasn't it?
It was. And nothing came easy on either side, maybe other than Samaj Morgan's punt return, but even that was a pretty incredible return and then an incredible play by Iowa's guy to run him down. The longest play of the game from Michigan was 17 yards. It was Donovan Edwards' run right before half. And, they didn't end up even scoring, so they didn't capitalize off of it. So it was a lot of shorter plays, a lot of, grinding it out, grinding meat, as Jim Harbaugh would say, and Jack Harbaugh would say. So it was that type of game. And really against Iowa over the years, over the decades, however far you want to go back, that's kind of the script, is how things play out. So I guess no surprise in hindsight that it went that way, but I'm sure Michigan would have liked to be a little bit more crisp on offense, not have to settle for so many field goals, not have to punt a season-high 6 times. But at the end of the day, you pitched a shutout in the Big Ten Championship. You won by 26 points, and you earned the number 1 seed. And, really, you played Ohio State a week before. I think that was really – you can say all you want about that being a championship game against Iowa, and it was, and they had to win to get into college football playoff. But the biggest game of the year was the week before. They got it done then, so it's kind of hard to top that, I guess you could say.
We have to keep that in mind. A lot of folks have said, a lot of ex-players said that everything that you put into that Ohio State game, you'd like to think, yeah, sure, you bounce back. It's a championship game. There's so much on the line. Big stage, you want to look good. But these are 18 to 22-year-old kids, and that is exhausting to bounce back in 7 days like that.
I agree. And, it's also the 13th game of the season. Not only is it exhausting to bounce back because, like you said, you empty the tank against Ohio State. You leave everything out there that you have, and every, player would say that, going back throughout the history of this rivalry, only in, the last 10, 12 years or whatever it's been has they added another game. And Michigan's looked great in the Big Ten championship game in years past, the last two, particularly the one against Iowa in 2021. And they've also, had what they had on Saturday night. So I don't think too concerned. You have to mention, too, that, it's the 13th game of the year, and you're not going to be fully healthy at that time of the season. And when you look at where Michigan struggled the most, I think, against Iowa, it was probably be run blocking and the offensive line. Well, how many practices has Carson Barnhart had this year at right guard? During the season, probably just last week. I don't think he was rotating in at guard at all before that because he was trying to play both tackle spots early on in the year. So that's something to consider, too. They're still kind of working out the kinks there. And I think these bowl practices, especially from an offensive line standpoint, are going to, be really important for them to get back up to speed because losing Zach Zinter is no small thing. They do have, some reinforcements there, but you got to get those guys, in a groove. You got to get them gelling together in their new spots with Trente Jones at right tackle and Carson Barnhart at right guard. And, it's even different for the center, Drake Nugent, when you got a new guy next to him at guard. So, it's going to take a little bit of time, but I think this month off they got the week off this week and then they'll get back to practice, but this month without playing a game will be beneficial for Michigan and probably every other team in the country at this point that had to play so many games.
Well, there's no question about that. And, watching that offensive line on Saturday, I think we really do have to take into consideration that communication is a huge thing. And with Zach going down the week before, the pass pro wasn't what we would like it to be. It wasn't what Sharon Moore would like it to be. But you know what? You have to give credit where credit's due, too. That Iowa defense is much better than I thought.
Yeah, it is. I was kind of wondering, is this a paper tiger type of defense? Because they play a lot of Big Ten West opponents. And then, the one time they went up against a team from the East that is, worth a lot is Penn State. And that Penn State offense isn't very good. They shut them out 31-0. Now, you look at that game, they had a lot of short fields set up by Penn State's own fantastic defense. So I think that's important to note. But I was wondering, okay, well, once they go into, run against or run up against a offense like Michigan's, maybe, it'll just be hard to sustain that level that Iowa's defense have played at, and give them credit for that not being the case. They made things really tough for Michigan. As far as pass protection, really the second half of the year, that has been an issue for Michigan. Now you lose Zach Zinter and Carson Barnhart at tackle, goes down to guard. Now you have to put in Trente Jones at right tackle. And, frankly, probably his weakest area, and he's still a very good player, even though he hasn't started this year, but his weakest area probably would be in pass protection. So, I think that's still going to remain a concern, especially when you're about to go up against two fantastic edge rushers for Alabama and Chris Braswell and Dallas Turner. Turner, obviously a guy that Michigan wanted at one point as a recruit. So it's going to remain something that they're going to have to figure out. But you still understand, too, they have a month of game plan to make sure that they can do everything they can. We saw against Ohio State, a lot of chips with the tight end, a lot of, keeping the running back in. You don't want to have to do that all the time, but, Michigan's going to have time now to figure out what their best course of action is going to be in that regard, because you don't want J.J. McCarthy running for his life. Like he was at times against Iowa. I also thought J.J. McCarthy was a little bit indecisive, and from what we picked up after the game as well, I don't think he was fully healthy throughout the entirety of that game either. He was healthier against Ohio State, wasn't as much against Maryland, but I think this month off is going to be nice for a guy in J.J. who's, kind of had to take some hits this year, especially in the second half of the season. So I think he'll be a guy that needs to rest up here this month. So I'm sure he's he's happy about a couple weeks to figure that out.
Yeah, you're right. He didn't look 100% on Saturday night. And the other thing, I think we saw the game plan against Ohio State, all of the surprises that Sharon came up with. I thought in the game Saturday night, it was, and I hate to say this, but vanilla. Most of the game, there were no offensive wrinkles, really, that I saw. It really did look like the base offense, didn't it?
It did, and it's just classic Jim Harbaugh, and I'm sure Sharon Moore, being kind of one of his proteges there, is picking up kind of the same philosophy that when you don't have to, you don't show that much. And it really works when you're this type of offense. The way that Michigan plays, where we can still beat you, with just being physical and running our base plays and inside zone and outside zone and that sort of thing. So I think that's kind of the approach that Michigan took against Iowa, and that Michigan took in probably a lot of games this year when you go back and look at it. So that's why I think they're able to rise to the occasion a lot in these bigger games. I think you had me on before Penn State, and we kind of talked about that theory as well. And it seems like it held true. I know Penn State felt a little more vanilla than maybe we thought it was going to be, but Ohio State certainly didn't. And, throughout the years, it's been that way. You think of last year against Ohio State, the year before. So I think that's definitely something that they do. Now you hope that they translate that over to, hey, we were vanilla for Iowa, so we could bring out some more wrinkles against Alabama. They didn't know who they were going to be playing at the time. But I think that's the hope from all Michigan fans, is that they open it up a little bit more, but you don't try to get too cute either, because I think they did that in last year's bowl game. So just make sure you have as good a game plan as possible against a team that can probably match your physicality and probably has more 5 stars and 4 stars. Well, not probably. They definitely do on the field. So you gotta be able to win against that anyway and move on.
Well, last thing on the game Saturday night, Big Ten championship game, talking about the defense, I had the feeling when we got up probably 3-0 that we were going to win the game. But I mean, that was an historically bad Iowa offense. But you take that out, the defense was still just absolutely stellar, weren't they?
They were. And it is funny. I sat up in the press box when Blake scored his first touchdown and they go up 10-0. I said ball game.
Yeah.
It could be famous last words. Obviously, you never know what's going to happen in a game. But you get up 2 scores or even 1 score, like you said. The opening field goal, which I thought was a good decision at the time, and held true to not go for it on that 4th and kick that field goal. That ended up being the game-winning score. So against Iowa, you take a lead and you ride your defense. And Jim Harbaugh has used that against Iowa throughout his career. I remember in 2019 they win 10-3, I think it was. Last year against Iowa, they got super conservative in Iowa City, ends up paying off with the win. Right, all he cares about is winning these games, and he understands how challenging it is to beat a team like that. So on the defense, though, I mean, this defense throughout the entire year has just come up with big plays when they need it. Like, it just feels like those guys, and it's a veteran group, but they understand when the magic needs to happen, as Jim Harbaugh has said throughout the year, and then they go make it happen. And, sometimes it's Jalen Harrell getting the pressure and Rod Moore gets the pick against Ohio State. But, man, lately it's been Mikey Stainer still, and just the big plays that he makes. I mean, forcing 2 fumbles, he earned that Big Ten championship MVP. He was my vote, and it's been a heck of a year though. That was not the only night that he's done that. Think of the Maryland game with his couple picks. Think of the pick 6 against Rutgers, the pick 6 against Michigan State. I'm probably missing a couple plays that he made. I mean, the pressure he gets when they send him as a blitzer. He had 3 pressures on Saturday night. One of them leading to that forced fumble, but they use him in so many different ways, and he's been so valuable. So you look back, and if you look at it from the big picture, that position switch last winter, early in the year 2022, him coming from wide receiver was one of the most important moves that Jim Harbaugh has made as his head coach when it comes to personnel. Because the last 2 years at that nickel spot, and especially this year because Mikey has really settled in there, have been fantastic from Mikey Stainer still. So what a huge move they made. What a huge decision for him to come back, and then he's just made big play after big play this season. But so has the defense as a whole, and it just felt like they were kind of suffocating that Iowa offense. And you saw it, the face of Brian Ferentz, quite a bit of frustration on Saturday. And part of that was because maybe some calls he wanted or whatever, but part of that was there was just they weren't going anywhere against this Michigan defense.
No, I think we have to feel really good going into the Alabama game about the defense. And, of course, we know they're next, and we know what this Michigan team's stated goals were when the season started. You win the Big Ten championship. Winning a playoff game is next on the list. And if you want to win it all, this is the way I look at it, you have to beat the best. It doesn't get any better than a matchup against Alabama, does it?
No, and just from the standpoint of it'll be the winged helmet, maize and blue against Alabama, and just like those colors clashing on that field, and then the sunset is going to come, and I'm excited for my first time at the Rose Bowl. But I mean, just the fact that it's these two iconic programs playing each other in that venue, which is very rare, obviously, because only in recent years has the Rose Bowl, become a college football playoff venue and everything. It's going to be amazing. But as far as the two teams too, I think it's going to be a great matchup. Michigan obviously needs to be a little bit more clean, I think, than they have been the last few weeks. But at the same time, you beat a couple top 10 teams at the end of the year there in November. So I think Michigan's going to be ready. And then you look at this challenge of Alabama. It's a team that really has had a journey of a season, but they've improved along the way. It's been a great coaching job by Nick Saban. Maybe not his, one of his vintage type of teams, but I think a team that's improved throughout the year certainly still has a lot of talent, and then has an emerging star at quarterback in Jalen Milroe, who is one of the more dangerous players you could line up against in college football just because of his athleticism. Probably a 4.40 guy, probably a guy with a big arm. We've seen him make a lot of deep passes, big plays through the air. So they don't ask him to do a ton. Like, he only has over 15 completions in a handful of games, but he's a guy that you got to contain. He's a guy that you probably got to spy with a linebacker a lot of the time. And that's going to, change how Michigan plays, I think, defensively. They haven't faced a weapon like that this year. When they played Talia Tagovailoa from Maryland, they were talking about, he runs like a running back and we got to contain him. We got to worry about our rush lanes. Like, I mean, yeah, Talia's a decent runner, but this is a completely different beast. So they haven't seen that this year. And as you know, Michigan historically has struggled with mobile quarterbacks. So that's going to be a challenge. But I think it's one that Michigan, can be up for as well. I think, Michigan fans should feel excited about this matchup. Like you said, you're going to have to earn it if you win the national championship this year and really every year. So it's no different than other years. It's going to be well earned, whoever wins this football game and whoever gets to move on to play Washington or Texas.
Well, we're going to have several weeks to break down this Alabama challenge, but let's get your early thoughts on how the Michigan offense matches up with that Bama defense from what you've seen so far this year.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm planning on going back and watching 3 or 4 Alabama games too in the next couple of weeks to kind of get a feel, because I wish in this job and as even just being, when you're a fan of one team or whatever, you get to watch more of the other teams, but time is obviously limited. So from what I've seen, from what I've researched so far, I mean, I think the most dangerous thing about this Alabama defense is its pass defense, with not only the pass rushers that I mentioned earlier, Braswell and Turner, but then 2 or 3 corners that can really lock down guys on the outside. So I think the biggest mismatch is going to be, 1, Michigan's tackles and offensive line trying to protect against these guys, and 2, the wide receivers and tight ends getting separation on Alabama's defensive back. So that may take a special performance from J.J. McCarthy to make sure they can move the football through the air, make sure he scrambles when the times are there, make sure that they get some design runs for him when it's there. But at the same time, I think J.J. is capable of that, and I think this offense is capable of putting together a game plan that can, lead to some success. When you look at it from a overall standpoint, Alabama hasn't put up a ton of points this year on very good opponents. They've been more methodical. They haven't really blown anybody out. And when you look at their Power 5 opponents, I think just a couple of games where they've won more than 2 scores. So you're probably looking at a game where it's going to be right there. They're not going to likely watch, knock on wood, but they're probably not going to put up 50 points or whatever it is. So you're just going to have to do enough offensively. But I think it is going to be a challenge because there's a lot of athleticism over there. And, they're a defense that held Georgia to 78 rushing yards. So clearly they're going to be able to match your physicality, as I said earlier. So I think that's going to be interesting. And it could come down to what quarterback plays better, and not to simplify everything. But it's been the case in a lot of Michigan games this year. It's been the case, throughout a lot of years in college football. So I think it could come down to that, and I think JJ being healthier is going to be a big benefit for him and this Michigan offense against what is a really tough defense.
Yeah, and I know a lot of Michigan fans I've talked to since we found out who we were playing. They're a little bit nervous. Oh, it's Alabama, all these 4 and 5 star guys. But the Bama folks are a little bit nervous too because their offense has been good, but it has really been inconsistent at times this year. They have that huge offensive line, as we all know, stacked with 4 and 5 star skill position players, a dangerous quarterback. This is probably the only, well, I shouldn't say the only Ohio State, but an offense that the Michigan defense, as good as it's been, is going to be stressed at every position group.
I agree, because they don't have like the Jerry Judys and the Devontae Smiths of, like when Michigan saw them a few years ago, or just Alabama teams in the last several years with those high-level skill position players, but they still have some really good ones. Isaiah Bond, Jermaine Burton at wide receiver, but then you also have a quarterback you have to contain. I think Michigan, with the way it's played a lot more zone defense this year than in years past, could help against a mobile quarterback like Jalen Milroe, because you have, you're kind of looking back more at the line of scrimmage instead of, kind of turning and running, where I think, you kind of have nightmares thinking about your guys with their back turned, and then next thing you know, the quarterback's running right behind them, and you don't even know, you're a couple seconds delayed there. So I think that's going to be important. I also think you do have to contain. You have to worry about your rush lanes. You probably have to spy at times, but I think you also have to just kind of pin your ears back also at times and get pressure on him, because you look at Jalen Milroe's stats. I mean, there are some games where he's sacked 3 times, 4 times. I think there was one with 5 or 6. So he does like to run around back there, get himself in some tough spots. And we've seen the same thing with JJ, right? It feels like when JJ takes a sack, it's like a loss of 12 yards instead of a 5 or 6, because sometimes those plays pay off. But you got to make sure that you make him uncomfortable, get in his face. But you're right. They've had as big a challenge as I'd say Ohio State. I'd agree with you there. It's just a different type of challenge. So, and one you don't really see in the Big Ten all that much. So they got to be ready for it and prove that they can play outside of the Big Ten, because Michigan's had a great run the last 3 years, but the one knock is that they haven't been able to do it on the national stage against, teams from the South. And look, not many others do anyway. You've played Georgia, TCU game kind of was what it was. But this is a really good opportunity for Michigan to make a statement and most importantly, win the game and move on to, like you said, their next goal on the checklist there.
Yeah, and again, I've talked to a lot of nervous Michigan fans since Sunday, and what I tell them is, hey, I get it, it's Alabama, but we have maybe 15 guys going in the draft. Before the season started, Jim was saying, hey, maybe 20 guys are going to go in the draft. But the bottom line is, we do have the talent to match up with them. When you get to a game like this, don't be nervous. We have plenty of guys. It's just going to be a matter of those guys stepping up and meeting the moment.
It is. It's kind of funny too, because, last year, the whole storyline all of December was, hey, what did you guys learn from last year against, in your first playoff appearance? And, how are you going to use that experience and whatever? And it's a great question, because you definitely do learn how to prepare for a game like that. And it's probably more the coaches than players too, how to schedule things. When do when is it too much preparation or practice, and when is it not? Nick Saban talked about that this week as well. He's learned from his 7 college football playoff semifinal appearances in the past. But at the end of the day, you just got to go out there. Like I thought you put it great there. Meet the moment, play well, execute in those 60 minutes. And then we don't have to worry about, hey, maybe they were overconfident or maybe they didn't prepare. It's like you ran into Georgia one year, and then the next year you threw a couple pick sixes, you made too many mistakes, and TCU played great. So you don't want to look back and do this hindsight thing of, well, maybe it was this, or well, maybe it was that. Prepare as well as you can, then get to the game and execute what you're expected to do. Have a great game plan. Coaches got to execute as well. But I think it's right there for this Michigan team, and they have a lot of veterans too. They don't have the 5 stars that Alabama does, but they have a lot of guys that have been in this spot, have this experience, and probably something worth looking up for me in the coming weeks. But think of the amount of snaps Michigan players who are returning have taken in the college football playoff compared to even Alabama players who they were there 2 years ago, they were there 3 years ago, but a lot of those guys are gone. So and a lot of those guys maybe weren't playing as much. So Michigan has guys that came back for this very reason. It's a hell of an accomplishment that they got back to this spot because it is not easy. Look at Georgia. Look at these great teams that didn't make the field. And now they got this opportunity to avenge what they feel like is a couple years of losses in this spot. But really, it's just to move on to their next goal. And, I think they got the guys to do it.
Well, we'll have plenty of time in the coming weeks for more previews, and I'm sure we will. In the meantime, the portal news is really interesting. Michigan will, we know, get involved in the coming weeks. Aside from the reported Dante Moore interest, have you heard any other names or position groups Michigan will be looking for to shore up as a number one priority?
Yeah, I think they're going to be pretty aggressive again and look at guys that they have ties to, or just guys that they feel like could fit them. And so Dante Moore, obviously one that, hey, you circle back a year later. We didn't get you last year, but hey, we're back in the college football playoff. You're looking for a new home. This could be a fit. So I think that's definitely one to watch. But they threw out a few other targets, and I think clearly you're looking at defensive back and wide receiver. I would say those would be two of the spots where you do want to look if you're Michigan. The Donovan McCulley from Indiana, a guy who started at quarterback against Michigan in 2021 and then transitioned to wide receiver and has been very good, led Indiana in receiving catches, receiving yards, and touchdowns this year. A guy who threw a trick play touchdown at the Big House this year as well. Maybe he can keep that Indiana to Michigan pipeline going. You got Jack Tuttle, you got A.J. Barner. They've both played really big roles for Michigan this year. Jack Tuttle, thankfully for Michigan, hasn't had to come in any games, but it's a valuable position at backup quarterback. And then obviously we know what Barner has done. But corner, they also have an offer out to Upton Stout out of Western Kentucky. Would be another guy like a Josiah Stewart or Josh Wallace that would have to acclimate to the next level. But he's somebody who I think could come in and compete for the starting nickelback position, maybe with a Jaden McBurrows, guys like that. But I think they're going to get more aggressive here as time goes on, balancing a lot of different things, trying to prepare for the college football playoff, trying to finish off this 2024 recruiting class, and then also, hit the portal hard. And I will say there seemed to be a year ago a shift in philosophy from this Michigan staff where they understand the timeline here. Is we don't know what J.J. McCarthy's going to do. We don't know what some of, like let's say a Junior Colson or a Rod Moore, guys with big decisions to make. But we're still going to recruit those positions because we know there's the possibility that we lose them. And you look at the offensive line last year. They took 3 offensive line transfers before they knew what Zach Zinter and Trevor Keegan were going to do. I think we'll see that same philosophy this year where they're just going to bring in the best players that fit Michigan and let everybody compete because that's today's world of college football. You have to do that. Otherwise, you're going to get left behind. So I think the Michigan coaches understand that. And we'll see some more offers go out as the days go on. It feels like you got to always be around your computer at this time of year. So, because something's always going on. There's always some new offer going out or something.
Well, final question before we let you get away then, Clayton. Michigan fans have a lot on their minds right now. Of course, the Alabama game, the NCAA investigation, which is not going away. Maybe the biggest concern, though, would be the question of whether Jim will or won't be here next year. Do you think there's a strong possibility, though, the contract will get finalized before the playoff game?
I think there is a strong possibility. I'm kind of done, though, given predictions or timelines, because it's so hard to do when there's so many moving parts. And when really there's a track record here of every time they seem to be working on a contract, it never seems to get done right on time. They always seem to get them done, even if it's like a year late. But between Ward Manuel and Jim Harbaugh, it just feels like they drag on and on. But then you add a couple of NCAA investigations into the mix, as you noted, and I think that complicates things even more. But if you're Michigan, man, just speaking personally, I feel like you just get this done as soon as possible. The NCAA investigation is going to play out. Whatever happens there, if there's something damning way down the road or whatever, you can obviously get out of that or make the move that you need to make. But for right now, you got to do everything you can to assure that Jim Harbaugh is going to be here next year and in the future. I think they're doing that. I think they're close to that from what we've heard. And our Chris Ballas has done a great job reporting on that, where there was some positive movement even this week. So I think that's pretty big news. But they got to finish it off and get the signature there because, really, even if Jim Harbaugh does sign, I wouldn't be shocked if he does take a phone call from an NFL team. I mean, he's still been under contract the last couple of years and done that. So I think, maybe that concern wouldn't be completely over with the new contract, but I think it would certainly ease some of the concern and be important, because let's face it too, he deserves more than what he's making based on when you look at the market out there. Certainly much more. And, you got to do everything you can to keep talent like this. Jim Hackett said that in 2014 on December 30th when they hired Jim Harbaugh. And it's clearly been the case throughout his career, especially the last couple of years. And if you're Ward Manuel, you understand that one of your most important jobs is doing that.
Oh, yeah. And as we said at the top of the show, there is so much going on right now, and it's going to continue to be crazy busy as we close the year out the next 3 weeks. And it's been great to have Clayton Sayfie from the Wolverine magazine and the Wolverine On3 with us. Clayton, always a pleasure to have you on the show. Enjoy your great work over there, especially your podcasts at the Wolverine On3. So we thank you again and look forward to another visit soon.
Well, thank you. Always fun, and no doubt. And I hope everyone has a great holidays up there.
A few news and notes of interest this week. Zach Zinter was named a consensus first-team All-American for the second year in a row on Thursday. Blake Corum and Will Johnson were named second team. And I'm sure in the coming days and weeks there will be many more honors for individuals on this team. Michigan is once again going after several players in the portal to strengthen areas of need. One of the more interesting players of interest is Dante Moore, and where have we heard that name before? We all know his story, and he is set to visit next week and talk to the staff. Dante certainly knows the scene here in Ann Arbor, and he is being pursued by some other big-name programs, so it will be interesting to see where all of that goes. For the next few weeks, we'll be back on our one-program-a-week schedule. Then the week of the Bama game, we'll have our usual 2 shows. In the coming weeks, we'll also start to pay attention to what's happening with both men's and women's hoops, and also hockey, until football season is over, and we hope that is not until mid-January. I know you feel the same way. We will stay focused on that. So that does it for now. Have a great Wolverine week, everyone. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Until we meet again, take care, and as always, go blue. Thanks for joining us today on The Michigan Man, here on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Our listener lines are open 24/7 for your calls at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Or email us at themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. That's themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. The Michigan Man Podcast is produced at the studios of Robin Lynn Productions, Allen Park, Michigan, and is not affiliated with the University of Michigan. Go Blue!